my entire life. He's pastored churches, he's preached the gospel all over the world. He's a man eating a man, so when we get an opportunity to have him, we snatch him. Big warm welcome. As a part of my message today, actually, we're not fully on vacation. We came for JL's birthday. We're in Okay, so you didn't waste your time. Hey, for our message today, I want you to help me with that introduction. I know Pastor Drew has taught you an introduction, and I want you to help me with that introduction again, and then I'm going to change it a little bit. So let's pretend we're going back to the beginning of the service, and I say, we are live. That was pretty weak. Come on. We are live. Can you do it one more time? We are live. Now I want you to change it. This time, instead of saying live, I want you to say the donkey. Are you ready? We are the donkey! We are the donkey! What in the world do you mean by that? Now, if you were just now saying, we are the donkey, you can turn to somebody, because they said it too, and point your finger right in their face and say, you are the donkey. You are the donkey. You do it again. You are the donkey. You are the donkey. Thank you. You are the donkey. Now, to be consistent, if we said we are the donkey, and you just said you are the donkey, I have to look myself in the mirror and say, I am the donkey. Say that. I am the donkey. I am the donkey. I am the donkey. Now, what in the world do we mean by that? Why would you come to church to be called a donkey? Because we are the donkey. I want to talk to you today about what I call the law of the firstborn. The law of the firstborn. Find Exodus chapter 13. Exodus chapter 13. But before we get to Exodus chapter 13, let me give you the background of this passage. And that is the story of the Exodus. In Exodus chapter 4, verses 21 through 23, God told Moses, I want you to go to Pharaoh. Remember, the children of Israel were in bondage. They had been slaves for about 400 years. And God told Moses, I want you to go to Pharaoh. He gave him all kinds of miracles and signs to do. But he said, I want you to go to Pharaoh, and I want you to declare to Pharaoh that Israel is my firstborn. And if you do not let her go, I will destroy your firstborn. Remember that story? Yeah. Exodus chapter 4, 21 through 23. That's exactly what God told Moses to say. And Moses indeed later on would go to Pharaoh and he would declare that God said, you are enslaving my firstborn. If you do not release my firstborn Israel, I will destroy your firstborn. Now, as you leave today, I think our birthday lady, JL, got a study guide. You can pick it up on your way out. You don't get it in the beginning because you'd read it and then you wouldn't listen to me. So you can get it on your way out. We've got all these scriptures and many more for you to study this week. But it's called what we're calling the law of the firstborn. And God said that because I delivered Israel, and the final blow to Pharaoh and Egypt was the destruction of the firstborn, God said from here on out, every firstborn is mine. Every firstborn is mine. And that was to commemorate how God did two things. He declared Israel, the nation, to be his firstborn. And then he destroyed the firstborn of Egypt. And you read about it in Exodus 11 and 12. There's many Psalms. You can get the study guide. There's many Psalms that refer to God moving through the land of Egypt and destroying the firstborn. And you remember why Israel's firstborn were not destroyed that night? God told Moses to instruct the people what to do. He said, you take a lamb and you slay that lamb, and you have each family consume the lamb in their home. But before that, you take the blood of that lamb and you put it over the doorposts on the top and on the sides of your door, so that when that angel of destruction comes through the land of Egypt, wherever I see the blood, I will pass over. And so one of the highest feast days and holidays for the nation of Israel is Passover. And that's where it comes from, the death of the firstborn of Egypt. But wherever God saw the blood, he said, I will pass over. But I never want you as a people, he said to Israel, I never want you to forget this. And so God instituted certain laws and feasts and festivals in the nation of Israel's life, in their religious life, so that they would never forget their great deliverance from God. By the way, you should never forget your great deliverance from God either. And so we come to this passage now. Now I want you to write down 4 words before we read the passage. Are you ready to write down 4 words? Because we are the donkey. I want you to remember that, but here's 4 words. Every firstborn, every living firstborn, God said, is mine. Because I set Israel, my firstborn nation, free by destroying the firstborn of Egypt. All the firstborn of Israel, they're mine. Whether it's an animal or the firstborn son in a family, it's the law of the firstborn. But every firstborn, one of these 4 things must happen. Number 1, it must be sacrificed. Or it must be redeemed. Or it must be substituted. Or it must be destroyed. It must be sacrificed, it must be redeemed, it must be substituted, or it must be destroyed. But something has to happen to the firstborn. God's claim is on the firstborn. Now let's go to our text and find out why I called you a donkey and why you called your neighbor a donkey and why you called yourself a donkey. Because we are the donkey. Look at Exodus chapter 13. And this is that night of the Exodus, and then God is establishing the Passover and all the laws of the Passover. In Exodus 13, 1 and 2, then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, consecrate to me, or sanctify unto me, all the firstborn. Whatever opens the womb among the children of Israel, both of man and beast, it is mine. So there's the law of the firstborn. You got it? Every firstborn of man or of animal is mine. Go on down to verse 11. And it shall be when the Lord brings you to the land of the Canaanites, as he swore to you and your fathers, and gives it to you, that you shall set apart to the Lord all that open the womb, that is, every firstborn that comes from an animal which you have, the males shall be the Lord's. But every firstborn of a donkey you shall redeem with a lamb. And if you will not redeem it, then you shall break its neck. And all the firstborn of man among your sons you shall redeem. So it shall be when your son asks you in the time to come, saying, what is this? That you shall say to him, by strength of hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt and out of the house of bondage. And it came to pass, when Pharaoh was stubborn about letting us go, that the Lord killed all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both the firstborn of man and the firstborn of beast. Therefore I sacrifice to the Lord all males that open the womb, but all the firstborn of my sons I redeem. It shall be as a sign on your hand and as frontlets between your eyes, for by strength of hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt. I just read for you what I call at least a portion of the law of the firstborn. And here's point number 1. Under the law of the firstborn, we've already said it. The firstborn belongs to God.
Amen.
God said, I take the firstborn, sanctify it. Now, I came upon these passages when we were doing a series on first fruits, because God also said, the first portion of every harvest is mine. And our whole idea of tithing comes out of that. That the first portion is mine. Proverbs 3, chapter 3 of Proverbs 9 and 10 says, you honor the Lord with your substance, and you bring the first fruits of all your increase. See, the first fruits, the first portion. So shall your barns be filled with plenty, and your vats will be overflowing. So God says, the first portion of every harvest is mine. And then he says, the firstborn of every living animal or family is mine. This is the law of the firstborn. Numbers chapter 3, verse 13. Because all the firstborn are mine. On the day that I struck all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, I sanctified to myself all the firstborn in Israel, both man and beast. They shall be mine. I am the Lord. That's the law of the firstborn. Well, notice I said with every firstborn, one of four things has to happen. Do you remember what those four things are? Sacrifice, redeem, substitute, or destroy. That's the law of the firstborn. Now, the Israelites were told by God to make a distinction between clean animals and unclean animals. And so if a clean animal was born, the firstborn of every clean animal, an ox, a sheep, a goat, one of these animals that Israel said was a clean animal, the firstborn must be sacrificed. So let's say you had a herd of sheep, a flock rather, of sheep, and one is born, and that firstborn of every mom, that firstborn has to be sacrificed. Or an ox. And he said, you can't make it work. It has to be sacrificed. You can't even take the wool off it. It has to be sacrificed. So the firstborn of every clean animal has to be sacrificed. But what about an unclean animal? God won't accept the sacrifice of an unclean animal. God will not accept an unclean sacrifice. So what do you do if you're going to obey the law of the firstborn? A clean animal, you sacrifice. An unclean animal, then you must redeem. And the word redeem means simply to buy back. You have to pay some money for it. So if you had an unclean animal, you must pay some money for that unclean animal because it is an unacceptable sacrifice. I want you to remember that idea of redeem. Redeem means to buy something back. And once something has been bought back, it can then be released. In other words, if you buy that unclean animal back, now you can start using that animal if you so choose. So everything has to be either sacrificed or redeemed. And so if it is a clean animal, you sacrifice it. If it is an unclean animal, you redeem it. What about the firstborn of sons? God was forbidding Israel to do child sacrifice. So the firstborn male of a family cannot be sacrificed. So what has to happen? If you can't sacrifice this boy, what must you do to observe the law of the firstborn? You have to redeem. And the price of redemption, oddly enough, was 5 shekels. Now, you can get all these scriptures. I know I'm going quickly here. But here's what God said. God said, rather than taking the firstborn male of every family in Israel to serve in my temple, to serve in my tabernacle, to be priests unto me, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take the whole tribe of Levi, and they will be a substitute for every other firstborn male. So now we have the concept of substitute. And that's why the Levites were the ones who served in the tabernacle. And when David brought about and Solomon, the temple, the Levites were the God said, I'm going to substitute the Levites for every firstborn son born in Israel. But what you have to do is you have to bring 5 shekels to those Levites to redeem the firstborn son. But you redeem them because there's been a substitute. Are you with me so far? I know I'm throwing a lot at you. Yeah. So every firstborn, if it's a clean animal, has to be sacrificed. If it's an unclean animal, has to be redeemed. If it is a son, God made a substitute through the Levites, but you still had to redeem it. And that's why in Luke chapter 2, what was Jesus? Jesus was the firstborn. Luke chapter 2, verse 7, and Mary brought forth her firstborn, wrapped him in swaddling clothes, and when the time of her purification was fulfilled, she had to go into the temple and offer 2 turtle doves for her purification, and, get this phrase, present him, meaning Jesus, present him to the Lord. What does that mean, present him to the Lord? She and Joseph were redeeming him. She and Joseph were paying those 5 shekels because he wasn't a Levite, but he was their firstborn. And so you can't sacrifice him. He's a child. You don't sacrifice children. So he had to be redeemed in light of the Levites being his substitute. So that even Jesus and his family observed the law of the firstborn. And so Jesus is brought before the priest, and he's presented to the priest, and he is redeemed. He's presented. In terms of his relationship with Joseph and Mary, Jesus was redeemed. Now, isn't that a twist? The Redeemer becomes redeemed. Why was he redeemed? Because he's the firstborn. And that is the law of the firstborn. Now, before we get into who you are, let's make sure we understand every firstborn must be sacrificed, redeemed, substituted for, or destroyed. Yeah. Now, this is very interesting because if you look back at Exodus 13:13, it specifically mentions what I'm calling an exception. The donkey. The donkey. He specifically mentions the donkey. And also in Exodus 34:20, same thing. But every firstborn of a donkey you shall redeem with a lamb. And if you will not redeem it, then you shall break its neck. That's destruction. You shall break its neck. And then he goes on to repeat, all the firstborn of man among your sons you shall redeem. There's something different about a donkey. It's not just a simple redemption, and you can't sacrifice it. There's this other ceremony that has to take place. If the firstborn is a donkey, notice he says, you shall redeem it with a lamb. Now, much of what happens in the Old Testament is a foreshadowing of a greater truth. And this is one of those passages. This is a foreshadowing of a greater truth. Now let's get into this. What do I mean when I say, we are the donkey? Well, this donkey, first of all, was unclean. Now you are a very attentive and a very gracious congregation. So I'm going to forewarn you. Are you ready to be insulted? Ready to be insulted? You already called me a donkey. Are you ready to be insulted? The donkey is unclean, so it can't be sacrificed. God will not accept it as a sacrifice because it is unclean. So are you. So am I. I don't care how religious I am. I don't care how religious you are. I am unclean. The great prophet Isaiah, in the first 5 chapters of the book of Isaiah, you'll hear these words of Isaiah. Woe unto you! Woe unto you! Woe unto you! I mean, he's woeing everybody. But then in chapter 6, he has a vision. And he sees the Lord high on his throne. He sees the Lord in his holiness. And you know how he responds? Woe is me! For I am undone. I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips, for my eyes have seen the King. In other words, we could translate this way. If you were to compare me to other people, I'm okay. Woe unto you. But when I stand in the presence of a holy God, it's woe unto me. I am unclean. And the Bible says that our righteousness is like that of filthy rags. Isaiah chapter 64, verse 6. Like the rags, perhaps, of a leper. Our righteousness is like that of a filthy rag. Romans chapter 3 quotes the psalm that says all of us are undone. None is righteous. No, not one is righteous. Not one of us. We've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And not only has our uncleanliness ruined our life, it has affected all of creation. Isaiah chapter 24, verse 5 says, the earth is defiled under its inhabitants. The earth is defiled under its inhabitants. And where does this uncleanliness come from? It doesn't come from the internet. It doesn't come from the public schools. It doesn't come from the government. My uncleanliness comes from within me. Remember Mark chapter 7, Jesus talking about that which defiles a man? He said, it's not that which comes from the outside. You're not defiled because of what you eat. You're defiled because of what you are. You're defiled because of what's already in here. I am a donkey. I am unclean. And in that unclean state, I cannot just give myself to God and accept